This video is about three important devices that help computers talk to each other: routers, switches, and hubs. Let's start with routers. Imagine you're at home using your computer to go online. To connect to the internet, your computer uses a device called a router. Here's what happens. Your computer sends data to the router, which then passes it on to the internet. When the internet sends data back, the router delivers it to your computer. This back and forth happens thousands of times per second. Now, a typical house today would have multiple devices, so let's add two phones. These devices, along with the router, can all be referred to as a network. This network is an example of what's called a local area network. Here's another network. This one is an example of a wide area network. A router is a device that routes data between networks. In this example, this router is routing data between these two networks. Now, bear in mind, this is a home router. Home routers are designed for home networks, which are usually quite basic. Businesses will have larger and more complex networks, so they will use enterprise routers. Enterprise routers are built to handle high volumes of network traffic, and they also come packed with advanced features to support those more complex networks. Now that we understand that routers route data between networks, what happens inside the network itself? This is where switches come in. Let's say that a business has all of these devices for their employees. There are lots of computers and a printer. How will these devices communicate with each other? The solution is a network switch. If one computer wants to share a file with another, data is first sent to the switch, which then sends it to the right destination. Now, why would these devices need to talk to each other? In business networks, some communication happens internally, without the internet. For example, when an employee prints a document or shares a file with a colleague, that traffic stays within the local network. Now, what if one of these computers needs to connect to the internet? For example, let's say an employee needs to visit a public website. This is where a router will be used. The computer sends data to the switch, which forwards it to the router. The router sends the data out to the internet. When the response comes back, it takes the same path but in reverse order. Now, once again, the router is routing data between two networks. So, to summarize, switches are used to connect devices within a local network, and routers are used to connect networks. Let's dive deeper. How does the switch know where to send data? Keep in mind, each of these devices connected to the switch will have something called a MAC address. A MAC address looks like this, and it's a unique hardware address which is associated to each device on the network. The switch will have something called a MAC address table stored in its memory. This table will include the MAC address of each device as well as the physical port on the switch each device is connected to. So, when a switch receives data from a device, that data will include the destination MAC address, which is the MAC address of the device the data is intended for. The switch will try to find that destination MAC address inside its table. If the switch finds a matching MAC address, it will look at the corresponding port number and then send the data to the correct device. Now, let's look at this same example again, but this time we'll dive a little deeper. If this yellow computer wants to communicate with this red computer, it will send a piece of data to the switch. This piece of data is called an Ethernet frame, and it looks like this. Inside this Ethernet frame, there will be a source MAC address, which is the MAC address of the device the data is from, and a destination MAC address, which is the MAC address of the device the data is for. Everything else can be referred to as data. The switch will use its MAC address table to find a match for the destination MAC address and then forward that data to the correct physical port. This is how switches work. Switches use MAC addresses to find out where to send data. Now let's look at how routers work. When a router receives data, how does the router know where to send it? Routers use IP addresses to figure out where to send data. An IP address is a unique logical address associated to each device on the network. If this computer wants to send data to the internet, it will send an Ethernet frame to the router. The router will receive the Ethernet frame, and inside the Ethernet frame there will be something called an IP datagram. The destination IP address will be inside the IP datagram. The router will then use the destination IP address to figure out where to send the data. Now, there are other steps routers take. For example, performing network address translation and using routing tables, but these are all beyond the scope of this video. The key differences to remember are that routers use IP addresses, whereas switches use MAC addresses. Now, before moving on to hubs, it's worth mentioning that there are many differences between a typical home router and an enterprise router. Home routers typically do not just route data. They have many other built-in functions, such as a switch and a Wi-Fi access point. The switch ports on a home router allow you to physically connect a computer or a laptop directly with an Ethernet cable. The Wi-Fi access point allows you to connect devices using Wi-Fi. Home routers are designed for non-technical users to get online quickly, so they work with little to no configuration. In a business environment, these functions are usually covered by separate devices. A switch will be used for wired connections for end-user devices. To ensure end users are able to connect to the business network using Wi-Fi, businesses will purchase wireless access points and place these strategically around the premises. These wireless access points are connected directly to switches. Let's talk about hubs. Before switches became widely available and less expensive, hubs were used to connect devices within a local area network. If this computer needs to send data to this computer, it would send data to the hub. The hub would simply send that data to the rest of the devices. Unlike a switch, which will look at a MAC address, or a router, which will look at an IP address, a hub will not look at anything. Hubs are rarely used by businesses anymore. They are inefficient as all traffic is broadcasted to every other device connected to the hub, which is a security issue. A hub will simply repeat the electrical signal it receives on one port to all of its other ports.